On the morning of November 4th, 2018, 40-year-old Tamla Horsford was found deceased in the backyard of a friend's home in Cumming, Georgia. She had been attending an adult sleepover party, which was meant to be a celebration for the mom who was hosting with other football moms from their son's youth football league. I looked up how to pronounce this county. I think I'm saying it right, but correct me in the comments if I'm not. The Forsyth County Sheriff's Office very quickly ruled her death an accident, stating that she had fallen off a second-story balcony. But Tamla's family was not convinced, and neither were the hundreds of thousands of people across the country who would come to learn her story. What followed was a controversial investigation marked by conflicting witness statements, a lack of photographs, compromised evidence, and questions about whether or not the color of her skin played a role in how authorities handled the case. And today we're going to break down the case. I do have an entire podcast episode on this case, so if you think you've heard this story from me before, you have, but I've gotten so many DMs the last week from you guys asking me to cover it on TikTok, so that's what I'm doing. And for the sake of TikTok, I'm not going to go into as much detail as I did in the podcast episode because we simply do not have time, but that episode does exist if you want to go listen to that. 40-year-old Tamla Horsford was a devoted wife and mother of 5 sons. She lived with her husband, Leander Horsford, in Forsyth County, Georgia. Leander, her husband, who goes by Lee, had a daughter from a previous relationship, so she joined their family, and from day one, Tamla treated her as if she was her own. So like I said, the family lived in Forsyth County, and context to that is important to mention. In Tamla's case, the relationship between her skin color and her death has been a subject of significant controversy and debate. A lot of people, if not most, who have followed this case since day one believe strongly that that did play a massive role in this case. And though there is no direct evidence that the color of her skin did play a role in what happened to her, I do think it's very important to mention that Forsyth County, Georgia, has a deep, troubling racial history. For decades, it was known as one of the most segregated counties in America. In 1912, the entire Black population was violently expelled from the county, and for more than 75 years afterwards, really no people of color lived there. The population there went from 1,098 Black residents to less than 5. And while the county has become more diverse in recent decades, the legacy of that history remains, and that unfortunately does play a big part in Tamla's case. By all accounts, Tamla was a very caring social person who was deeply involved in her children's lives. It sounded like she had sort of the life of the party personality. She was always in a good mood. She always had a big smile on her face, and she was always up for anything. She attended every single activity for every single one of her children. If you could count on her for one thing, it would be that no matter what, she always showed up for her family. She had the privilege to be able to stay at home with her children while Lee was the provider of the family, and that was something that she never once took for granted. So the kids were involved in a lot of sports. One of those was football, and through their son's youth ball football league, there were football moms, obviously including Tamla, who had bonded over supporting their kids on the field. Tamla had gone to know most of them, and she was familiar with them. She knew their kids, which is why in November of 2018, when she received an invitation for a friend adult sleepover at one of the mom's house, she was really considering going. And she ultimately decided to do so because why not? She knew most of the women who were going, and it sounded like it did have the potential to be a very fun night. She told her husband Lee that she wasn't incredibly eager to go, but it was more of a why not. So on the night of November 3rd, 2018, Tamla had dinner with her kids and her husband Lee at home before heading out to go to her friend's house to celebrate. She drove herself to the party and Lee stayed home with the kids. And the whole reason why there was a party / sleepover to begin with was because of John Myers. She was hosting it at her house, and she was very much so into football. LSU was playing Alabama, and she saw it as an opportunity to throw a little party, cheer on LSU, and she was the one who extended the invite to Tamla. And I say friends very lightly because it's not like they did everything together. They didn't hang out outside of seeing each other at their kids' sporting events. But anyway, Tamla Horsford arrived at the party around 8:30 p.m. and John had invited a group of moms, most of whom they'd also met through the local youth football league. And they knew that they were likely going to be up late, be up partying, which is why a lot of them had decided to spend the night. Tamla got there, and shortly after she arrived, she changed into pajamas. It was a white onesie covered in paw prints. And their little party was originally supposed to be all women, only for the moms. But John's boyfriend, Jose Barrera, and another husband of another mom called Stacy ended up sticking around. So at the party, there were 10 women, including Tamla, all of whom were white women, except for Tamla, by the way, and then the 2 men. The party got started. Everyone's talking, relaxing, mingling, whatever. There were a few of the women who had only met once or not at all, so people were introducing themselves. The men ended up going downstairs to the basement to watch football, while the mom stayed upstairs in the main living room area. At halftime, the 2 men come back upstairs and they hang out for a little bit. Then around 11:30 p.m.-ish, anyone who was not spending the night kind of started to get ready to leave. And after that, throughout the next couple of hours, everyone started slowly trickling off to bed. Around 1:30 a.m., Jean and her boyfriend, Jose Barrera, Barrera go to sleep, but Tamla was still awake. She actually made a comment saying that she wanted to go home to sleep in her own bed, but some of the moms told her that she should just stay because it was late. At one point in the night, Tamla FaceTimes her husband Lee, and when describing how she was, Lee has said that yeah, she was a little loosey-goosey, she was relaxed, she was enjoying herself, but she wasn't acting crazy. He said that she was totally coherent, she was totally normal, and she would have been more than okay to drive herself home, but ultimately she did end up staying. And remember, she was still awake after Jean and her boyfriend went off to bed. The last person to see Tamla Horsford alive was Bridget Fuller. She was picked up by her husband at 1:47 a.m. According to Bridget, before she left, she saw Tamla eating a bowl of gumbo. She talked to her for a second, and Tamla stated that she was getting ready to go to bed soon. Bridget left, and throughout the next 10 minutes, the home security system registered the back door opening, closing, and then opening again for the last time at 1:57 a.m. According to the door alarm log, when it opened for the last time at 1:57 a.m., it did not close again until Tamla's body was discovered the next morning. The next morning, November 4th, 2018, at approximately 8:45 a.m., Jean's aunt, Madeline Lombardi, who also happened to live at the house, woke up and she went to the kitchen to make some coffee when she looked outside through a window, and that is when she saw Tamla Horsford lying face down on the grass in the backyard, not moving. She was still wearing her pajama onesie. Madeline immediately went to go and tell Jean. Well, actually, Madeline says that the first thing she did was actually get down on her hands and knees and prayed. She prayed, and then she went to go and find Jean and Jose, which is a certainly interesting thing to do because at that point, she had no idea if Tamla was alive or not. She had no idea why she was out there, no idea if she was hurt, if she was okay, nothing, but she decided to take a quick second to pray before she actually knew what was going on. So she goes to find Jean and Jose. She knocks on their door, she walks in, then she asks Jean if she could speak to Jose because according to her, she needed to tell him that his, quote, friend from the islands was outside lying on the floor not moving. Those are her words from her mouth. And if you're thinking that the entire thing is weird, it's because it is, but it's also weird because Jose didn't really know Tamla that well, but for some reason, Madeline wanted to go past Jean to tell Jose first. So Jean and Jose then go outside to check on Tamla. According to initial reports, Jose Barrera checked for a pulse by touching or lifting Tamla's arm or leg, but he could not feel a pulse. The group called Forsyth County 911 just before 11 a.m. And both Jean and Jose speak to the operator on the line saying, quote, she's not moving one bit, she's not breathing, she's completely face down in the yard, she is stiff. She was drinking and it looks like, I'm guessing maybe she fell off the balcony, end quote. When authorities arrived less than 10 minutes later, Tamla Horsford was pronounced deceased at the scene and her body was then taken for an autopsy. Important to note that no pictures at all were taken of the crime scene before her body was removed. She was found fully clothed in her white paw print onesie pajamas, lying face down in the backyard below a second-story balcony, and the distance from the balcony to the ground was over 14 feet. The Forsyth County Sheriff's Office immediately began investigating Tamla's death. But from the start, investigators were working on the assumption that her death was an accident, not a homicide. Meaning that investigators did not preserve the crime scene as they would have or should have for a suspected murder. In my opinion, they actually did not preserve the crime scene at all. The case remained open for almost 4 months, and according to their statements, authorities spent approximately 300 hours investigating the case and conducted over 30 interviews with party guests and others connected to the event. But then on February 20th of 2019, the FSCO made their official determination. That happened 2 weeks after the state of Georgia medical examiner provided their final report. The sheriff's office determined that Tamla must have fallen off the second-story balcony on accident, resulting in her death. In other words, they ruled the entire thing an accident. Now let's talk about the autopsy results. According to the official GBI medical examiner's report, Tamla had severe injuries to her head, neck, and torso. So many injuries of blunt force trauma. The injuries included multiple superficial abrasions on the face, including the forehead above the left eyelid, bridge of the nose, right temple, and chin, 4 types of hemorrhages in the skull and in the brain, a fractured second vertebrae, so a broken neck, a dislocated right wrist, cuts on her arms and legs, a laceration to the right ventricle of her heart, and multiple spots of bleeding in the head. So that's a lot of injuries, isn't it? But get this, for whatever reason, the GBI only took 5 autopsy photographs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's it. That is incredibly unusual, especially given the extent of the injuries documented. Usually the number of photographs taken is a lot higher, and not only should they include pictures of every single injury, but they should also include pictures of the body bag, the remains, identification photographs. Yet allegedly, they only took 5. Ralph Fernandez, the attorney representing Tamla's family, argued that her injuries alone, forget the crime scene, her injuries alone should have warranted for way more than 5 photos, and he stated that he has never seen the photographs himself because the GBI claimed that they were not subject to open record requests. So on February 20th, about 4 months into the ongoing investigation, the county sheriff's office announced that the case would be closed, even though the official determination of her cause of death was because of, quote, multiple blunt force injuries, end quote. This is what they said, quote, the state of Georgia has ruled the death accidental and consistent with an accidental fall. None of the injury patterns noted were consistent with foul play, end quote. When they closed the case, the department released the incident report and the death investigation documents to the public. And for Tamla's family, as you can imagine, these documents did not provide any answers. If anything, they only raised more questions. And I think it goes without saying that Tamla's husband was absolutely, completely, and utterly shattered when he heard that his wife was gone. When officers knocked on his door to inform him, Lee has said that the disrespect was instant. They had knocked and they asked him, "Is your name Lee? Is your name Lee?" He asked why they were asking, and they just kind of yelled back at him saying, "Is your name Lee?" He again said, "What does this pertain to?" And they looked at him coldly with zero sympathy at all, and they said, quote, "It's about your wife. She's deceased," with literally not 1 ounce of emotion on their faces. Lee said that immediately they told him that it was an accident and that he wasn't allowed to go over to the house where Tamla was, saying that everything had, quote, already been taken care of. Eventually, when Lee received more information, he had a lot of the same thoughts that you guys are probably having right now. Things were not making sense, and even if you just solely focus on the injuries, they do not seem to be consistent with injuries of a fall. Add to that all of the other inconsistencies and just weird things regarding the entire investigation. Sorry, real quick, you guys, it just started storming, so if you hear that in the background, sorry about that. Anyway, Tamla's family refused to accept the official ruling of Tamla's death being declared an accident. They hired an attorney, a man called Ralph E. Fernandez, to advocate in their behalf and push for answers. In May of 2020, approximately 18 months after Tamla's death, Attorney Fernandez wrote a letter to Lee that would become a very big turning point in the case. In the letter, Fernandez stated that he and his team had, quote, finished the exhaustive review of the records related to the investigation. And after looking over everything, his conclusion was that the review reflected that Tamla's death being a homicide was a very, very, very strong possibility. And then there was another massive issue, Jose Barrera, John's boyfriend, because at the time of Tamla's death, Jose Barrera was working as a pre-trial services officer for the Forsyth County court system, aka he was working in a position that gave him access to law enforcement databases and confidential files. He was more than involved in Tamla's case as a witness because he was literally in the same house the night before the night of her death, and he was one of the first to see her body the following morning. So in regards to Jose, Fernandez wrote to Lee that because of his job, Jose was able to access paperwork regarding the investigation. Quote, the case agent was a close friend of a subject who turned out to be the leak of the ongoing investigation. I have come to the conclusion that the truth never had a chance here. The family then had an independent autopsy done, and that once again revealed injuries that were not fully explained by one simple fall from the balcony. It was their opinion that Tamla's injuries seemed to look way more like potential defensive wounds, indicating that she was involved in some sort of struggle. Quote, she couldn't have, with catastrophic injuries, fall from the balcony and ended where she did. She had defensive wounds that were not accounted for by either the Forsyth County or GBI, end quote. So let's talk about Jose Barrera, shall we? I told you guys that he worked as a pre-trial services officer for the Forsyth County court system, but only 2 months after Tamla's death, so in December of 2018, he was placed on administrative leave. What was the reason, you may be asking? Well, because he had been caught using his position to access confidential files related to Tamla's death investigation, a case in which he was a witness, which simply should not have happened. On December 20th of 2018, Jose Barrera was terminated from his position completely. It also came to light that Jose Barrera had accessed Tamla's incident report internally on multiple occasions when he was not supposed to. It wouldn't be until June of 2020 that the GBI would officially finally agree to reopen the case. They reopened it, but then it was announced that it was coming to a close in early 2021. And the results of this new, I guess you can call it, investigation were still devastating because, again, they concluded that no charges would be filed in the case, stating, quote, the DA review determined the facts and investigative findings do not support pursuit and prosecution of criminal charges. In other words, despite the family's serious concerns, the independent autopsy findings, and public pressure, the GBI found insufficient evidence to charge anyone with a crime. That felt like a massive slap to the face to to anyone who knew and loved and cared for Tamla. And to this day, despite having 2 separate investigations by law enforcement, Tamla's death remains full of questions that may never be answered. As of July of 2026, the case remains officially closed. No arrests have been made and no charges have ever been filed against anyone. Yeah, I know that was a lot of information that I just threw on you, but yeah. That's it for me today. Please let me know your thoughts on this case, and thank you for spending time with me today and for listening to Tamla's story. Hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.